Dante Stallworth, as y'all know, be writing. And he is, again, like I told you, a courageous writer, courageous thinker, courageous voice. And they say don't bite the hand that feeds you, but he often shows that he's willing to speak out against the NFL, to challenge them to be better, to challenge them to do right by players. And he wrote this piece, I played in the NFL. It needs way more than a black anthem. The subtitle, if the league wants to show its commitment to its players, it should hire and promote more black coaches and executives. I loved that you did this. Dante, break it down.
Yeah, this had come up after in 2020 after the George Floyd murder in Minneapolis, and the players were really at this point the players were fed up with the NFL not having their back, with the president just and his cohorts just leveling insult after insult, bullying NFL players, and the owners are not sticking up for the players. The NFL itself was not sticking up for the players. And so the players came out essentially and told the NFL, listen, this is what we want, and this is what we're going to do to get it. Now, one thing that I did not mention in that piece that I kind of wanted to mention, but I left it out for a number of reasons. But one of the things that no one really knows about that, it was pretty much kept quiet throughout that whole time, was that when the owners of the NFL were getting together and trying to decide if and how they were going to make it a mandate for the players to stand for the national anthem, there was buzz around the NFL locker rooms from the players that there was going to be a league-wide mutiny if the owners and the NFL decided to mandate that the players would stand for the national anthem. And once the NFL and the owners got wind of that, then it went right out the window immediately. But I think that was kind of the first step of when the players started to realize how much power they had. So I wanted to write that piece as someone who had played in the NFL, been around the NFL for a very long time, and also coached for a year, but was also on the other side, in the political side of it and the writing side of it, to kind of take a step back outside of the NFL and look at it and see what was really happening and be able to tie my two experiences together. And the common thing really became, you don't see in the NFL, you don't see black men in a position to rise to the position of an offensive coordinator or a head coach or a defense coordinator, right? So to do all that, you essentially, and on the offensive side of the ball, you can't go and be a tight ends coach and then become a offensive coordinator or a receivers coach, which most black coaches are in the NFL as far as assistants. They're mostly receivers coaches.
Well, I need you to break all this down for me because you're saying some important points that I think people who are more casual NFL fans, and I'm a casual. I don't watch the NFL since the Colin Kaepernick thing, but even when I did, I was a casual. I consider myself a highly knowledgeable basketball person and a below average football person. So two things. One, you talked about the ascension of coaching. I know Andy Reid, when he came to Philadelphia, he was a quarterback's coach, and it was sort of surprising to people that he could go from a Green Bay Packers quarterback's coach to the head coach of the NFL, where I'm finding he kind of skipped a step or two. He wasn't an offensive coordinator. He didn't do the things that back in the day you had to do. I remember how long it took Ray Rhodes to get a job as a head coach in the NFL after being an extraordinary defensive coordinator, right? I'm saying that to say it seems like there seems to be a racial ladder for career toward coaching for black folk and a different one for white folks. I want you to break that down for me. But you also said something about it seems like they're head coaching. I'm sorry, they're assistant coaching in the skilled positions. Why is that?
So as you mentioned, the ascension to head coach for especially today in today's game. Now this game is so offense oriented that they want an offensive coach to be the head coach, right? So to become an offensive coordinator, usually you come from a quarterback's coach position. And as we've seen throughout the league, throughout history, now today there are a lot more black quarterbacks. But obviously with Doug Williams, being the first black quarterback to win a Super Bowl, that was back in the 80s when that happened, in the early 90s. So
it was 85. I'm sorry, I was embarrassed.
Yeah, the Bears was 85. Doug Williams, I believe, was 90, 91. But to the point of emphasis is that there have not been many African American coaches to be a quarterback coach in the NFL. And that usually from a quarterback's coach to an offense coordinator to a head coach. That's the pipeline. But most of the black coaches in the NFL, at least on the offensive side of the ball, they're skill position guys. They're receivers coaches because a lot of them played receiver in the NFL, and they're running backs coaches now. And I think that ascension is because essentially the quarterback knows, you know, what the running backs have to do, what the line have to do, the protection schemes, the route running, and all that. And then
that's a lot of thinking. That's a lot of thinking for a black man, Dante.
Yeah, you know, it's crazy. But one thing I will say though, you know, there are coaches that I think that want to put guys in positions. And you look at, you know, Coach John Harbaugh, who put T. Martin in, who started out as a wide receivers coach, played quarterback in college, played quarterback, got drafted 5th round to the Pittsburgh Steelers. And, you know, he was a receivers coach for a while with the Ravens, but now he's the quarterbacks coach, coaching Lamar Jackson, an all black quarterback room, which has never happened in the NFL before. Right. So you have these culture changes that are happening, you know, crumbs piecemeal, but at the same time, you know, you'll see some effectiveness. And I think when you're putting that person in a position, you are essentially saying, like, you know, here are the keys to the Ferrari. Now you're in control of how your career can go from there, because there's very rarely you're going to have a head coach from the offensive side of the ball that has not been a quarterback's coach first. And to get to the head coach, to get to the offense coordinator, you've got to be a quarterback's coach. And to have the guys that need to be in those positions, you know, the coaches are the ones that put them in the position. So if they're not in that pipeline, there's not a very good opportunity for them to even become a head coach in the first place. So you have to get in that pipeline first, and then once you're in that pipeline, then you have the opportunity to ascend to become a head coach.
David, this is one of the reasons why I want to have this episode, right? Because there's a way that, again, people don't see the intersections between, society and sport, that they bleed into each other. They are the same thing in a lot of ways. The arguments for why black people couldn't be quarterbacks were very much rooted in the same arguments for why black folk couldn't be president, or black people couldn't be mayor, or why Eastern European immigrants couldn't come to America, right? That they were just inferior intellectual capacities. And now that we see people trying to get money from the CTE stuff, again, when they start race norming, again, there's the race piece of this. The NFL seems to operate on a white supremacist racial logic. Am I overstating that?
No. Oh gosh, no. Because it's very baked into the cake of the National Football League and how they operate. And we can talk chapter and verse about it. But basically, they've always had this perspective about the athlete and what athletes get to be thinkers, and what athletes basically just get turned through this machine and leave their careers like in very difficult shape. It's one of the things that I think defines the NFL more than really almost any other sport on the landscape, except for maybe something like boxing, where your body is going to pay a toll for this, and yet you're very easily discarded and not treated with the way you should be treated for putting your body on the line for what is the most remunerative sport in all the land. Now, how is it going to break through this? It's not going to break through this the way the current pipeline operates. And that's what Dante is talking about. That's so important about quarterbacks, coaches, offensive coordinators, and that being the pipeline, because it's an offensive league. Now, I find it very odd. And I think this is the logic of the league. I'm not talking conspiracy theories, but I'm talking about the logic of the league. It's very odd and interesting to me that as we have achieved this generational breakthrough of the black quarterback, like nobody blinks twice when Caleb Williams is the number 1 pick and Jaden Daniels the number 2 pick. There's no big discussion about what this means, that these two black quarterbacks. We're past that. Remember I know Mark remembers this, when Michael Vick played against Donovan McNabb in the NFC Championship game. That was a huge news story. 2 black quarterbacks against each other. It had never happened before. We're past that point. But isn't it interesting that as this space has been ceded to black bodies, black minds, black strategy, that there's now this new kind of heroization of the quarterback's coach and the offensive coordinator, who are invariably white. And it creates a picture that makes the quarterback, the black quarterback, look more like the result of somebody else on the joystick. And because they don't want to be able, they don't want to send the message to fans that this space is now officially, like, say, wide receiver, for example, or cornerback, a primarily black space. And so it's a way of assuaging the white fan base that, don't worry, it's not really X, it's really Y who's behind it, and X is merely an instrument of Y.
That's so fascinating. You're right. I mean, when it was Joe Montana or Steve Young or Dan Marino before, it was the quarterback is a uniquely intellectual position that only certain kinds of people can do. And then once the McNabbs and the Vicks enter the league, and then it turns up a notch, and you get the Mahomeses of the world, and you have to kind of say indisputably that the best quarterbacks in the NFL, you go top 5 quarterbacks in the NFL, you got a few black people there. So now you can't say that this is a white man's position at the highest level, because there's some real strong arguments for Mahomes being the GOAT. Now, I don't know enough about football to engage that debate. I would still say Joe Montana, but I'm old and don't know that much. But the point is, he's in the conversation in a way that no black quarterback would have been 20 years ago. And now you're saying, they're telling us, well, it's the black body, but the puppeteer is still a white man up there, and that's why this thing is happening. That is wild.